Croome Court dates back to Norman times, but it's renowned for being home to the Coventry family from 1596 to 1948. By 1730, the fifth Earl had taken some bold steps to expand his empire. But it was in 1751 when his youngest son became his successor following the untimely death of his older brother. The now sixth Earl, George Coventry, was about to change history. He immediately appointed an up-and-coming young landscape architect by the name of Lancelot Brown, and between them went on to create a blueprint for the future of English landscapes. Evidence of the wall kitchen garden was first documented at the beginning of the 18th century, when it was believed to be around 5 acres square. Excuse me. We know that in 1751, the boundaries were extended to form the current rhomboid shape, covering over 7 acres, or equivalent to 2.5 hectares. You can see the expanse of its footprint to the left of the mansion and the service buildings. Here is an extract from an article in the Gardening World magazine from 1887, portraying the array of glasshouses at their pinnacle. When we arrived at Croome in June 2000, it looked slightly different. The National Trust had recently purchased 800 acres, or 300 hectares, of the surrounding landscape and parkland, and the property developer acquired the mansion, stables, and the inner grounds, but with dubious intent. Whilst most of Croome had been occupied in one form or another throughout, the walled gardens had been neglected for nearly half a century and had become completely derelict. Nature had claimed back what was once a thriving horticultural powerhouse. All of the service buildings had decayed beyond recognition, and the roofs of the backsheds had completely collapsed in places. Worse still, the garden had been used as a dumping ground and was littered with all kinds of toxic waste. As we started to clear some of the debris, we slowly became aware of our new surroundings. This may be a good time to point out that we are not professional gardeners or garden historians. Perhaps if we were, we would have been smart enough to run away. We work in the music industry, designing and building stages for rock bands. We bought the property because it had planning permission to convert into a 7-bedroom house with an indoor swimming pool, a tennis court, and a 5-car garage. That was to be our dream home, or so we thought. First step was to secure a bedroom, a bathroom, and somewhere to sit in the evenings. The gardener's cottage was by then uninhabitable, with no services. We had 6 weeks to convert a wreck full of rats and spiders, but we somehow managed. With our base camp secured, we set about repairing the outbuildings, and by 2002, we were making good progress with the backsheds. We also managed to clear a small part of the garden and plant some lawns. During the following 2 years, we focused our attention on restoring the melon and cucumber house, which had by then uncovered. The damage was so severe that we knew we would have to start again from scratch. Fortunately, there remained traces of detail which we were able to record and later replicate. Meanwhile, we dispatched our construction team off to learn about working with lime mortar. It was only after we had cleared the ivy and other obstructions from the perimeter walls that we could see the extent of the damage. Worse still, large sections of the wall had to be taken down because they were unstable. This was going to take years. The first step was to salvage all the reusable bricks and stack them into pallets to dry out. By 2004, we were ready to restore the melon house, which first required it to be completely dismantled. However, it was not long before the building began to rise from the ground once again. A common feature in English walled kitchen gardens is the hot wall. Hot walls are brick-built structures with internal chambers like horizontal chimneys. The heat source is a wood-burning fireplace built either into or adjacent to the wall. The heat radiates through the brick membrane, creating a microclimate close to the outer surface. At Croome, we have a magnificent example measuring 3 meters in height and 100 meters in length. This hot wall had 5 underground fireplaces, which we discovered only by chance. Next mission, to make a start on the 40-meter long vine house. Firstly, we extracted the remains of cast iron hot water pipes, which once distributed the heat within this massive glass house. Next, some excavation work was required to determine the condition of the foundations. Then, to our surprise, we uncovered a long and deep brick trench, plus evidence of some older footings. There must have been an earlier structure here. We knew from illustrated archive material that the 6th Earl had commissioned George Todd, an elite architect working only for royalty and the super wealthy, to design a bespoke vinery for him in 1806. After some basic research and conversations with a local garden historian, we concluded that this must have been the location of Todd's vinery. It was a shame to have lost such an important building, particularly as we had all of its provenance. Meanwhile, work on the melon house was advancing visibly. With the glass now on, we wasted no time in putting it to good use. By the beginning of 2006, we were ready to start restoring the fig house. Like with the melon house, it had to be completely dismantled. The sliding sash windows and their complex winding mechanisms were a challenge, but with patience and care, we managed to get them working again. Before long, the fig house was looking as good as new. The gardens sloped gently from the northeast to the southwest corner, and over time, the topsoil had slipped down, obscuring one of the historic paths to the lower end. With approval from the conservation officer, we set about carving out a giant alcove in the hillside to resolve the problem. This would later provide opportunities that we had not considered at the time. By 2008, most of the repair work had been done to the perimeter walls. And with the rabbits now safely on the outside, we were able to resume planting with some confidence. Firstly, just a few vegetable beds, then later, the south-facing border, and so on. The new alcove provided an ideal location for a formal rose garden, which I had previously promised Karen at a weak moment. And with so much reclaimed paving and cobblestones, we had most of the materials to hand. The centerpiece was to be a restored Robert Adams sundial, which we discovered many years before, broken into several pieces. And by summer of 2010, the first of the 300 scented roses began to show their heads. With plants and vegetables now growing, we needed a reliable supply of water, and preferably not the stuff from the tap. The original hydraulic system was introduced by Brown in 1766 in the form of a 14-meter diameter dipping pond. The pond was fed with rainwater collected from the glasshouse roofs and channeled via a land drain. You would then have to dip your bucket in and carry the water to the needy plants. But the clay pond lining had long since failed and the pond was no longer functional. We knew what we had to do. After dredging and restoring the stone circumference, we introduced a watertight concrete bowl. The pond was once again ready for service, and we added the finishing touches by reinstating the original brick-lined cobbled path which surrounded the pond. Meanwhile, the fig house had become a popular retreat for overwintering citrus fruits and the occasional banana plant. Fruit trees along the south wall and in the orchard were maturing well, and fruit and vegetables were starting to deliver. By 2014, we were feeling incredibly pleased with ourselves. The herbaceous borders were looking beautiful, the glass house is productive, and the perimeter walls now fully restored. It was time for a well-earned pat on the back. What could possibly go wrong? Then our carpenter brought a problem to our attention. 10 years after completing the restoration of the melon house, The timberwork was showing signs of decay. On closer inspection, it became apparent that we would have to do some major repair work. Not only did we have to remove and repair all of the window frames, but all the glass had to come out to replace the putty. To make matters worse, we had to repeat the process 2 years later with the fig house, all because we had used the wrong materials. For the first time, we were facing a new enemy. Maintenance of this magnitude had not been factored into the programme. This came as a major blow and forced us to pause and rethink. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning that this was to be our dream home, but our dream had changed. Without realizing it, we had been seduced by the magic of the walled garden. We had spent all our savings and our future earnings on a 2-bedroom house in a 7-acre garden. It was time for a reality check. We knew that what we were doing was not sustainable. There was still a significant amount of restoration work ahead, and now a maintenance program on top. It was too late to go back and too costly to move forward. Eventually, we decided to approach our neighbours, the National Trust. They had been pestering us for years to open our gardens to the public, but we were very selfish and refused. However, they had 2 things that we now needed desperately: paying visitors and volunteers. We agreed to give it a try, and in 2015, we opened the gardens for a few weekends over the summer. Volunteers were recruited and they immediately got to work. Soon the word was out and visitors came flooding in. Our wonderful new collaboration was working. The gardens were never designed to receive large numbers of people, particularly families with pushchairs and those with mobility needs. There was no infrastructure to support this kind of traffic. Historic plans showed an earlier layout, but these were simple grass trails. There was an opportunity to introduce a new layout that would retrace earlier paths where possible, but also work with the contours of the new terraces. Once the design was approved, we began constructing our new paths in preparation for opening in spring 2016. No expense was spared, as these paths would have to last for 100 years or more. We then added espalier, apple and pears of all varieties along the path edges to form avenues. With the newly defined beds, we planted a wide range of fruit and vegetables, some modern, but mostly heritage varieties. However, we did overlook one important detail. We had not considered how we were going to water our newly planted crops, other than with buckets. So we embarked upon another major project to install a state-of-the-art irrigation system. This entailed digging 1 metre deep trenches all over the garden, more than 1.5 kilometres in total. We also had to tunnel under the newly laid paths. The idea was that water would be pumped up from the pond and stored in 2 giant tanks at the top of the garden. Then 2 powerful pumps pressurised and distributed throughout the newly laid pipes to all zones. Next, our attention turned to visitor toilet facilities. An old tumbled down building at the lower end of the hot wall looked like it might be an ideal for conversion. We decided to push ahead with sub-ground works while awaiting planning approval. It was not long before we uncovered a series of underground arches. This was extremely exciting for us and our visitors too. We received an email from one of our regulars who had decided to conduct some online research, suggesting that this might be the remains of the Todd Vinery. As I explained earlier, traces of that had previously been found under the more recent vine house. However, these arches were highlighted in the illustrated drawing. Upon closer inspection, other similarities started to become apparent. Could this be the Todd Vinery after all? We were taking no chances. It was time to call in the experts. Susan and Mike kindly came to the rescue. After studying the evidence, Susan spotted a detail in the drawing which clearly showed a fire pit in the northeast corner of the building. A few hours later, and after a lot of digging in the rain, the pit was revealed. Susan was now satisfied that this was the genuine article. This meant that we would have to scrap our plans for the visitor toilets. Besides, we now had a Todd Vinery to restore. But one question remained. What was the other structure that we previously mistook for the Todd Vinery? After studying our photographic evidence, Susan concluded that this would have likely been a pinery vinery, an experimental dual-purpose hothouse in which vines and pineapples were grown alongside each other. Subsequent research revealed that it was designed and commissioned by Brown in 1757, but later abandoned because it didn't work. When visitors returned in 2017, they could not believe the transformation that had taken place. We even had our new visitor centre and shop open and ready to receive art exhibitions and group visits. Some friends kindly donated 2 ancient olive trees, inspiring us to create a new Mediterranean garden. We constructed a series of contoured raised brick beds inside the alcove adjacent to the rose garden. We wanted it to be finished for when we opened at Easter 2019, so we pulled out all the stops. We didn't quite finish in time, but it was a good work in progress and a talking point for our visitors. We later completed the raised beds over the winter months, ready for opening in 2020. We even planted a wonderful display of spring flowers. Sadly, we were the only ones who got to enjoy them. With the arrival of the COVID pandemic and subsequent lockdowns, it soon became apparent that we would not be opening the gardens in 2020. So we took advantage of the unexpected circumstances and set about completing tasks which could not easily be accomplished in the presence of visitors. In the southeast corner, significant groundworks were required to align levels before we could complete the perimeter paths. But first, we would need to build a new 50-metre long section of wall with an ornate doorway to match the existing ones. This is the only main vehicle access point, so we needed to include a wide gated entrance. Next project on the list was restoration of the 19-metre long tomato house. As with the others, we had to start again from scratch. However, having learned some of the valuable and expensive mistakes, we were determined to do it right this time. Only top quality materials would be permitted, and a subtle use of technology where the eye does not see. By early summer, the tomato house was ready to hand over to our head gardener. And meanwhile, the paths in the Mediterranean garden received their new surface finish. So, what comes next? There are still 2 hothouses to restore: the pineapple house, which is currently underway, and we hope to have complete by the summer. The orchard house remains an aspiration for now, as we need to recharge our financial batteries. The latest chapter in COVID story suggests that we may be able to open to our visitors by mid-June. This will require our garden volunteers to return at least a month before. The National Trust are currently unable to make any promises, but we remain optimistic. In any event, things should be back to normal by next year. So looking to the long term, we know that this heritage asset could only be sustainable by sharing it with the wider community. After all, we can't take it with us. Despite the interruption of the pandemic, the trend for visitor numbers is upward, and we are confident that it will soon be a tipping point when the contribution from the revenue streams will more than cover the cost of maintenance. We will be forming a charitable trust to manage and safeguard the future of this project. Our intent is to complete the restoration work, to enjoy the walled gardens for as long as we can, and then, with support from trustees and volunteers, hand them over to the nation for future generations to enjoy. Thank you for listening. Where do I do? And share. Got it. Thank you.
Michel, on ne t'entend pas, tu n'as pas mis ton micro.
Exactement. Yeah, okay. So thank you again, Chris. Sorry, you could not hear. Thank you. So any question to Chris and Karen?
Yes, we have a question from Henri Cavallo.
Henri? Henri, on vous entend pas. Le micro, faites la même. Faut débloquer votre micro. Voilà.
I had a question about the walls, which seems to be very important in your gardens. And you mentioned that they prevent the plants from being eaten by the rabbits. So that's one function. So I had one question. How much surface do you have within your walls, your very nice brick walls? And what other functions do they play in the gardens, these big walls?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
What's the surface within the walls? And what other things, apart from preventing the rabbits to eat the plants, do they play?
Karen, do you want to answer that?
Well, the walls keep the heat into the garden, so they protect from the elements.
But what's the surface? It's so it's 7 acres and it's mostly clay.
No, he's talking about the walls, I think. So how much wall, I think.
How long are the
surface
walls?
within the walls?
It's the surface within the walls. It
Yes.
is 2.5 hectares.
Ah, quite big. So
Yes.
Yeah.
And what else do we grow now that the rabbits can't eat?
Well, most of the garden is now productive.
and have you used the walls to plant many things like apple trees, something like that?
Got, along the south-facing wall, we've got apricot, peaches, and a
Worcester pears. Yes.
Worcester black pears, which are cooking pears. So they're all expelled up there. Then on what facing is this one?
The west-facing
The
wall.
west-facing wall has got plums and damsons against there,
and cherries.
And cherries.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't got anything planted against the hot wall as yet because that needs some restoration work doing to it. And the east-facing wall, we've got some more cherry, but only a couple. We've really used that more as a herbaceous border.
Yeah.
Another question. Do you see any similarities between the settings of a garden and that of a music stage?
Actually, the garden is in 3 stages. So you've got you remember I mentioned that we cut out this giant alcove at the bottom. But what I didn't mention is that all of the clay and soil we took up to the top of the garden. So actually there are 3 different levels. And our visitors come in from the top. And when you come in from the top, you cannot see what else is there. So it's a little bit like a show. You know, you reveal as the visitor walks through the garden, it reveals new areas that you cannot possibly see. So from the top of the garden, you cannot see the rose garden or the Mediterranean garden, for instance. And we also have a magnificent bank which has 25,000 daffodils, which again you cannot see until you walk to the other side of it. So yeah, it's a bit like a show without the music.
But in fairness, when we did the trenches that Chris showed you for all the water pipes, we actually put in all sorts of cables in there. So actually, if we wanted to, we could have music in the garden and lighting.
Susan, any comment? You have to open your microphone.
Visiting Croome is a continual adventure. They've always got something new up their sleeve, but it's also absolutely stuffed with history, which always makes it exciting for me. I long to see them restore the hot wall. I wish Chris had shown the picture of him standing on the hot wall where there was a chimney once and lifting this piece of pavement, as it were, from the top and finding the chimney underneath. As I say, it's just always an adventure going there. And I can't wait to revisit.
Well, let's hope it won't be too long, Susan.
You're always welcome here, and we always try and do something to keep your interest up. We have a few more surprises yet.
Alexia? Lucy? You.
A couple of people have asked about pineapples. Have you actually had any success growing pineapples? Are you going to try?
Okay, well, the pineapple house hasn't been fully restored yet, so no, not at the moment. But yes, as soon as it is, we will have a go at it. But obviously trying to incorporate using a slightly more modern form of heating than manure, because I don't think I've got enough volunteers to be able to keep doing that.
Yeah, that's an important point, really. You have to be pragmatic. Some of the technology that we have encountered during the restoration is, of course, long since obsolete, and there are alternative solutions which, in some cases, you have to embrace. The irrigation system being an example. Right now, today, the new tomato house is having an electric underfloor heating put in, because it's the technology is sustainable, it's reliable, and it's cost effective.
I think, the other way of looking at this is that when, the 6L started building at Croome, they were using the height of technology then. And if the Earls of Country was still here, and doing the same thing, they would have been still using the new technology, because you can't afford to pay that many people anymore.
Yeah. Alex, you have question?
J'aurais éventuellement une question, si vous pouvez dire un mot sur le mode de financement.
How do you finance your operations? What's your economic model, Chris and Karen?
Have you heard of an organization called the Rolling Stones?
Back to music.
I think to give you a sensible answer, obviously we own our business, so if the business is making a decent profit, then we'll take some money out of the business and put that into the project. We use our salaries, we use the money the income that we normally get from visitors. When we were open, I used to make cakes every week, which we used to ask for donations from people. We've got the shop, so any money we were making from the shop. So, and then, sorry, I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to get a small inheritance, so we used that towards the gardens as well. So lots of different income streams. We
do group guided tours. Yeah. We have, the great thing about the garden is that it's an ideal environment for doing art exhibitions and displays. So for the first 3 years, we rotated art exhibitions. Most of the art's still in the garden. We ended up by buying it.
We did sell quite a lot.
We did sell quite a lot, though.
So, again, that was another income stream. And with the group visits, we do, everything from just a walk around the garden where Chris talked about the garden, to one where I do like a cream tea for people, and that obviously costs more. So cheese and wine evenings, they're very popular with some of the local groups. In fact, some of them we struggle to get out of the garden.
Especially after the wine.
Yes. So we try and be as creative as we can to find different ways of getting income for the gardens.
Thankfully, work is coming back. Obviously, our main trade is in live entertainment. And as you all know, there's been no live entertainment for the last 12 months. But in the last month or so, the order book has just gone incredible. So hopefully that will fund the restoration of the hot wall and the pineapple house and who knows what else.
Yeah, I mean, ever since Boris Johnson had announced his roadmap out of COVID, and with our success that we're having with the vaccination programme, it seems to have given people a lot more confidence.
Chris,
Yes, Lucy?
Chris, I have a question concerning the design of the garden, because on one hand, you have a great respect for these historical evidences.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you made a modern design.
Okay. I knew this would be slightly controversial, and it is. And I'm going to spread the blame a little bit to a guy called Mike Thurlow, who many of you will know, was the head gardener at Audley End for many years. In fact, for most of its restored years. Mike was a consultant, well, remains a consultant to us on this project, and he inspired us to be brave and to take this step forward. And the justification for it is twofold. One, as I said in my presentation, we cannot replicate the original layout. Or I say original, there have been so many different layouts over the years. I just gave one example in my talk. But it would be impossible now to replicate that because we've changed the topography of the garden to a certain extent. But secondly, there was an opportunity to give the garden a facelift and a 21st century personality. Sure, we've changed the paths, but we've not changed any of the structures or any of the historic elements of it. And those who come after us could always change it back if they disagree with, or if they don't, if they don't feel that that's the right thing for the garden.
I've got something to add to that. I think that what you have to remember, that this is a huge space which originally was just growing food for the mansion and their other houses. That's what it was. It was a food factory. Now, it's when you've got a space this big, I mean, there's no way we could plant all this out and just produce fruit and vegetables. And also, it wouldn't be very interesting for our visitors. So, we had to think about luring people in, and what they want to see flowers, they want to see fruit trees. We've offered all this to them with different sorts of planting for different seasons. And also, as Chris said at the beginning, we had to think about access. Health and safety is a big issue. And because the garden is on the slope, if it rains, it becomes very slippy and muddy very quickly. And I can't have push chairs and wheelchairs and people with mobility problems going up and down the garden when it's that wet.
I think you'd have to come and see the garden to understand the rationale. It's difficult to visualize from just looking at a plan. You need to see it in elevation, and hopefully that will convince you that
it doesn't
what we've
look
done
modern.
is not too. Yeah,
it doesn't look modern.
Not too intrusive.
Chris and Karen, since you mentioned Audley End, I would like to introduce the crew. I see the part of the crew of Audley End, and they will be making a presentation in June. So,
fantastic!
Oh, great.
Kelly and
hi guys.
Gemma.
Yes,
We have a question concerning the glass house frames.
Yes.
Which you had to replace.
Yes.
What was the type of wood that didn't work so well, and what did you replace it with?
Okay, good question. The wood that we used at the start, through complete ignorance, was just pine. It was a soft wood, and we didn't have the experience to appreciate that it just wasn't suitable for purpose. The latest glass house, the tomato house, we have used a hardwood. It's known as sapele. It has similar properties to Iroko and oak, but it takes to paint very well. So that was our choice in this case.
There's one more question. relating to the Rolling Stones. Can't get satisfaction. Any frustrations you've been very happy to overcome during this restoration project?
I think coming to terms with not having a 7-bedroom house and having something that is infinitely better, but completely worthless by comparison. So in other words, we've poured all this money into the project, and it's got no intrinsic value, because who would buy a 7-acre garden with 2-bedroom house? But for us, it's priceless. It's given us an opportunity in life that we could never have dreamt of. Our dream when we came in here has been transformed into something much higher.
And I think also, after our initial reluctance to open the gardens to the public, actually we've got a lot of very regular visitors, and to see their appreciation of what we've done and their enjoyment that they get from the gardens as well is really, really satisfying, despite the fact you've got at times maybe, you know, 50 to 100 people wandering around your back garden.
A last question, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, Lucy?
Michelle, there are a couple of other questions. Sorry, Chris and Karen. There's a question for Susan, going back to the beginning. Your book on Dalkeith, that you took the map from the presentation. Can you tell Elizabeth Taylor what that book is?
Yes, it's by Charles McIntosh, and actually I've got it here, but it'll take a moment to find it. I'm just going to have a look. Ask the other question.
The other question was in the question and answer. Henri, would you like to answer the question live from Mauclair?
What's the question?
Sorry.
What's the question? Oh.
What's the question?
It's for Henri Carvalho.
Yes.
Have you seen it then, Henri?
Have you seen, what did you say?
So the
Question
question
from Hervé Mauclair.
is, quelle est la proportion de visiteurs pour le château et pour le jardin? Ticket différent?
Yes, we have 2 tickets, one gardens only, which everybody take, and you can also visit the inside of the chateau, and 60% of our visitors, of our guests, go inside the chateau. It used to be much less. It used to be 20%, and little by little, we have improved inside of the chateau as well, and people are willing to go inside. So their stay is has become much longer, as I said in my presentation.